Hi, I'm Susan Clare, GourmetQuilter. Thank you for being here. Today I thought I'd show you a fun little spool block. So I drew this up because I was just wanting a fun little spool block. It's not a very large block, as you can see. It measures 6.5 inches now, so it will be a 6-inch finished block. And it's just using a couple of colours or maybe multiple colours. I've got a few up here. You can see that you can use all different colours for your threads. You can turn them and alternate them. My idea behind it was some of the traditional wooden spools. I've got a couple of them sitting just here. They come in all different shapes and sizes, but I've just gone for the one size for this particular pattern. So I thought it was quite cute. So I'm going to give you the measurements. If you'd like the measurements, you might want to write them down so that you could make some of these blocks if you wanted to as well. So nothing terribly hard about it. So I've chosen a colour for the actual wooden part. Again, you wouldn't have to always have the same colour on the blocks that I've made up here. I've just used two different backgrounds. They're quite similar. You might want to do some slightly different things. You could use multiple fabrics, using up some leftovers if that's what you wanted. And then I've just used different colours for the actual colour of the thread. But you could coordinate things, you could colour grade things. Oh, there's so many things you could do. So I've got everything cut out here so you can see how it all goes together. So for the actual wooden spool, we've got the top and the bottom obviously made the same way, and we're just going to pop a little square on the corners that will trim and fold down so that we get this little shape. I wanted it to have a little flat sort of top rim as well as the shapes in there rather than coming to a point. So the squares are a little bit smaller than often when we put a square on the end of a rectangle like that. So I'll go ahead and sew this. So what I've done is I've actually drawn a diagonal line. Just with a pencil, I've just gone from point to point. So I've got diagonal lines already drawn onto my little squares there, and I've got to do two of these. So one for the top and one for the bottom. And we can chain piece these. I've got the machine all ready here to sew, just a straight stitch, sewing on that drawn line. I'm just sewing, as I said, on that line. We can chain piece these. So if you're making several of these blocks, you could chain piece them through. And I'm thinking, well, you might think, what would I want to make lots of spool blocks for? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One reason is that they're cute and they're nice. That's two reasons. Another one might be, another thought you might have is, well, what would I do with them? Well, you could make a quilt, you could make cushions, you could make a border for a quilt, you could make a table runner. There's a whole lot of things that you can make with them. You could put them on a bag. So that's the four corners sewn on now. So now we can just trim those away, and then we can press them so that we've got nice little corners on there. So I'm just trimming 1/4 inch away from my stitching. So I'm just going to lay my ruler on. There's a little 1/4 inch in line. Oops, we'll get it around the right way. On the ruler, I'm going to lay the line on the stitching so that I'm cutting 1/4 inch away from the stitching. And these are just tiny little bits. Probably not worth saving unless you save tiny little bits for some particular reason. And then I'm just going to press those. So I'm going to press them in towards the spool, in towards the brownie colour rather than into the white. It probably doesn't really matter, but I just thought it would be better if they went in. And we'll get the other one done. So when I make a block like this, there's quite a few things that need to be joined together, and particularly things like these little triangles. These are probably the fiddliest part of the block, and I do like to do the fiddly or harder parts of a block first. I think it probably comes from when I was a child and my mother told me that I had to eat all the food on my plate, because I used to like to eat all the things I liked first rather than the ones I didn't like, and then she'd make me sit there. And there's nothing worse than cold and old food when you didn't even like it when it was new and delicious. I mean, what's with that? So I'm going to sew these little squares on the end now of my spool to bring that out to the right length so the spool is sitting well within the block. Same thing, we can chain piece these. So if you're making lots of blocks, you could just be putting quite a few through. You don't just have to work on one block. And I need to pop them on the other end now as well. I find it easier to sew things like this when there's a seam involved with the seam on the top side so that I can see where it's going and it doesn't get caught up underneath by mistake. And again I'm going to press those, and I'm going to press those in towards the spool. Oops, pulled in my corner over there. And this end as well. So I've got the top and bottom part of my spool ready now. So now we just need to put the top and bottom part of the block on. So that one goes up there and that one goes down there. And the same thing, I like to have anything with seams, if I've got a choice, to the top. Sometimes you have seams top and bottom. So we're sewing this piece onto the longer side of the spool piece now, not the short bit where the triangles came in. That's going to be where the colour comes on. So I was saying before, you could use them for a quilt, for a border on a quilt. You could use them for the centre of a quilt. It wouldn't have to be on the outside. You could put them all over a quilt. I'm going to press that. Now this time I am going to press that towards the background fabric, because there's a couple of seams there that iron's catching today. And it'll just sit flatter if we press it towards the background. It's a little bit easier, and there's seams and things. So we're doing pretty well. We've got a top and bottom of our spool. So now all we need to do is sew. So this centerpiece was a rectangle. I said I was going to give you the sizes. So the top and bottom edge is 1.5 inches by 6.5. So you need 2 of those. The spool was 1.5 by 4.5, and you need 2 of those. These little corner squares to make the corners on the spool were 1.25 inch squares, and you need 4 of those. And you needed 4 1.5 inch squares for the ends of the spool piece. This piece in the middle here is cut 2.5 inches wide by 3 inches long. And these pieces are 2.5 inches wide by 2.25, so they're not quite square. This is slightly wider than square. So we just need to join those onto here now. One on each end. I find I often have little pieces of a 2.5 inch strip left over, and this would be one way of using up some of those smaller pieces. And I'm going to press that seam in towards the colour as well. Oh, we've nearly done this block already. We're pretty speedy. So that should now all fit. Everything should be the same length. It's looking pretty good. So they just need to be sewn together now. So when we sew those together, this diagonal seam on the spool is going to cut across here, so that where they intersect should be 1/4 of an inch down so that it will intersect at the actual seam. And that should all sit nicely for you. So you can keep an eye on that as you go and just make sure it's looking like it's intersecting. It's looking pretty good. And at this end as well. And just because I've got the seam going in the opposite direction underneath, I've just got to make sure that doesn't get caught up underneath. We're all looking pretty good. And then we just want to pop the other end on exactly the same way. And again, if you're making multiple blocks, you can be chain piecing these through at each stage though. So lots of fun to be had with fabric, I have to say. So we'll give that a press now. So this time I'm going to press that seam down towards the coloured spool thread part. And there. We have our little block. So I think that's looking pretty good. We've got a couple of them here. In fact, I've even got another one here. So we could pin those up with the others so that they've got some friends up here. You could actually, at this stage, we could make like a little 9 patch because I seem to have 9 of them. As I said, you could vary the spool colour if you wanted to. You could vary, well, it's your quilt. You could vary whatever you like. But sometimes there's something quite nice about a background that kind of is a little bit similar throughout, and then the colours will pop out quite nicely. It could be a darker background. Really, the choice is yours. So I did do an image up here of more of those spools. I thought they looked like quite a fun quilt. Maybe you've got a sewing friend you want to make a gift for, or maybe you need a gift for yourself. You could make your own. Other than that, that was just a fun little spool block that measures 6.5 inches, so a 6-inch finished block. Thank you.